This episode is brought to you by The Science of Scaling. And The Science of Scaling is a podcast that, honestly, you should check out.
Yeah, it's called The Science of Scaling, and it's all about how to scale a business successfully, whether it's how to find outside capital or what to look for in your very first sales hire.
It's a new show hosted by Mark Roberge. She's the best-selling author of The Sales Acceleration Formula. He's also a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School and the founding CRO of HubSpot.
One thing that Mark mentions in the show is whether your company is valued at $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, the failure rate is the same, which means we suck at scaling.
In each episode, you'll hear interviews with people like Kyle Parrish, the VP of Sales at Figma, and Kevin Egan, the head of sales at Atlassian.
I've checked out a few episodes of The Science of Scaling, and it's great. Like, for me, I run a company as a bootstrap company. We're not the kind of company that's raised capital, but even still, things like sales, that's super important, and it's the lifeblood of our company. So for me, it's definitely helpful to hear how other people have sort of, who have been there and done it before, how they're actually approaching scaling. So go on in your favorite podcast app, whatever it might be, and search for The Science of Scaling. That's The Science of Scaling. Check it out. I think you're really going to enjoy it. This episode of Rocketship.fm is sponsored by Industry, the Product Conference. This October, gather with hundreds of product managers and product leaders from all around the world for 2 days of keynote talks, challenging working sessions, interactive discussions, social events, and more. Or add a third day and take part in half-day workshops with some of today's top product management facilitators for workshops on leading your teams to innovation, product roadmaps, achieving product market fit, and more. This year's lineup may be the best yet, with keynote speakers including product legend Marty Kagan. He's the author of the book Inspired, which is considered by many to be the seminal book for product managers and product leaders. There's also product positioning expert and author of Obviously Awesome April Dunford, and product leaders from Figma, IDEO, Amplitude, and so many other places. Plus, if you use the code Rocketship, you'll save $100 off your pass. Visit industryconference.com/global for more details. Again, industryconference/global for more information, but pricing increases on the first of the month, so register soon to save.
So as many of you may know, I ventured out this year. I left my job as the chief product officer at Dribbble to start a brand new company, and that company is gigantic. No, really, that's the name. We're actually very small today, but we are the training institute of the future. And my goal is to help you master the new influential disciplines that are driving results within organizations. And we're starting with some absolutely incredible courses like product leadership taught by Ben Foster, the former CPO at Whoop, deconstructing leadership with Allison Go, formerly of Meta and Amazon. We have revolutionizing marketing with AI, which is taught by Marie Osipova, who is the chief marketing officer at Penny.ai, and an upcoming product management course, which is taught by my co-host, Mike Belcito, along with Anna Marie Clifton of Coinbase and Asana, and Victoria Kennedy, who worked at Axios and Huge, and is now running her own venture capital studio. It's not just video courses. We're combining video lectures with take-home assignments and exercises, and then small group mentorship to really help make this information indelible for you and to help level you up, and all at a cost that most companies' learning and development budget covers. So if you're interested, go to gigantic.is, that's gigantic.is, sign up for a course, and you can actually schedule a call with me, and I'll walk you through everything that you need to know. And if you enroll and let me know that you heard about this on Rocketship, I've got a special discount for you. So go to gigantic.is, sign up today, and start your journey upskilling your product, leadership, and marketing skills. I can't wait to see you there.
Welcome to the Rocketship podcast. I'm Michael Sacca.
I'm Joelle Steiniger.
And I'm Matt Goldman.
And we're having 20-minute talks with entrepreneurs teaching you how to launch your product into revenue.
Check out our book at howtobuildarocketship.com to reserve your launch discount and to download a free chapter.
In this episode, we talked with John Sheehan, co-founder and CEO of Runscope.com. John was also an early part of the teams at Twilio and If This Then That. As you can imagine, John has a pretty unique take on how APIs should be consumed, provided, and marketed. You'll learn about how to market to developers and how to make your API docs a bit more awesome.
Welcome to the Rocketship podcast. We're here with John Sheehan, one of the co-founders and CEO of Runscope. John, welcome.
Thanks. Hey, thanks for having me.
No problem. So those of us that may not be familiar with what Runscope does, give us a quick overview.
Sure. So we make debugging and testing tools for developers who use APIs. So what we're trying to do is take this sort of new generation of API-powered applications and give the developers that build them the tools to understand where problems arise, and then also sort of on an ongoing basis verify that the APIs their apps depend on are up and returning correct data.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about where you guys came up with this problem, where you identified the problem, and how did you get rolling in the early days?
Yep. So a couple years ago, I started at Twilio. I was one of the first 10 employees there. And I spent my first year and a half at Twilio working on the developer evangelism program. So building that up from, I was the first full-time evangelist to a team of about 10 when I moved off of that. And we spent a lot of time as an evangelist working with customers at that like very early stage of integration with an API, particularly Twilio's, but we saw a lot of that. After Twilio, I went to If This Then That, and If This Then That, Ift had like 65 API integrations at the time. And so I started to see actually a lot of the same integration problems that I was seeing with Twilio customers. And this stuff kind of just wore me down over enough time that, I was sitting there at my job dealing with a really horrible API and not having any insight into what was happening in, this staging environment where this one problem was happening, and just feeling like I was dealing with last generation's tools, or I was kind of like, I had a really primitive rock when I really wanted a hammer. And so just started thinking about that and discussing ideas with another former Twilio colleague of mine. And we came up with this idea for this really stupid, I say stupid, it's our core business now, debugging proxy that let us view any API call in any language, it didn't matter where it was, any public API, we could inspect it. And we started playing around with that, and it kind of like set off a lot of light bulbs in our heads. Well, like, hey, we could do this, or hey, we could do that. And so about a year and a half ago, we just decided to take the leap and start the company based around that idea. And so not too long after that, we raised a seed round. That was about just over a year ago. Hired a team, launched initially last May, built a second product called Radar, which is the automated testing product, launched that last November. And then a couple weeks ago, closed an A round, and now are, again, trying to keep the growth going and adding new products and just solving more API problems for developers.
So why don't you tell me how we, as we build Hookfeed, how we could use Runscope?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of ways. So one, during the development stage, what I tend to do is, I imagine you're listening for a lot of the Stripe webhooks, and we use Stripe too, so we get a lot of their webhooks back. And during dev, webhooks can be really sort of frustrating to deal with because you have two machines that are talking to each other, and there's not necessarily an interface or a way to inspect that things are working or not. And so we sort of sit in the middle between any two API calls, whether that's something you're making outgoing or something you're listening for incoming, and show you all of the traffic that's going back and forth. So during dev, you can actually see the real JSON payloads or whatever other payload you're getting back from a service, so you can actually write code to handle it properly, which speeds up integrating with webhooks tremendously. But then once you move into production, there's a couple different things you want to do. One, you want to make sure that your webhook receivers are up and responding properly. So that's where sort of Radar comes in. It lets you hit your endpoints as often as every minute or on every build or deploy and say, hey, when I send this data, do I get the correct data back, or is it even up or down? So you can do some monitoring for your webhook endpoints. But then along the way, if your server chokes on a given webhook event, you can go into Runscope and see that it failed and then retry it right from the web. Or if you need to change a piece of data before sending it, we recently had to change all our Stripe keys because of the Heartbleed thing, and we had a couple, stray keys out there. And so what was happening is some requests were failing. So what we did is we edited them, we updated with the new key, and then retried them, and then we didn't miss any messages that were going back and forth. And so we give you sort of this insurance layer between two systems that you don't normally get any visibility into, so that you can see what's happening and then address problems when they arise.
So those early days of a developer getting in with a new API or a new product, are critical. And it sounds like that's where you've been involved at Twilio and If This Then That. So what does that look like for Runscope now? How are you guys ensuring that developers are getting off to a good start?
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time at Twilio like talking about that first 5 minutes when somebody hit the website and being able to get them to send a message or make a phone call within that first few minutes. And a big blocking point was that people would download the SDKs or start making calls against the API, and they would get an unexpected response, but then not know how to react to it, or even not even see what the exact details of the error they were getting back. So, API providers are starting to use our tools to help them get their customers up and running faster. So a lot of sales teams will use us to sort of spy on companies that are in the prototyping stage. So they'll say, hey, instead of hitting our API directly, go through this URL. And now every time that customer makes a request to that URL, the sales guy can watch and see the stream of requests that are coming through. And if one day they stop, they know that prototyping has stopped, right? And call them up and say, hey, if you run into a problem, we noticed your requests have stopped. Or if they start getting errors, they can proactively reach out and help the customer work through those errors. And so it's this, I think it's the biggest point here is that the visibility just allows you to more clearly communicate around problems, and integration problems are the biggest detractor for somebody using your API. And so if you can get on the same page with the consumer of the API at their point of the problem and actually see the real deal and not have to ask them for their code and try to recreate their environment and go through all of this rigmarole just to see what was happening, really makes solving problems just a lot faster. So for API providers, they love this ability to see exactly what the customer is sending so they can help them faster.
Yeah, that's awesome. You guys can see that.
So one of the things that is notoriously difficult to do is to build your customer base in a community around a developer community. I know you've had a lot of experience with that with Twilio in the early days and taking a lot of what you've learned to Runscope. But can you talk about some of the tactics and things that are different in going after developers versus, any other kind of B2B or consumer audience? I know one of the things you've done is request bin and have a free tool out there. If you want to talk about that a little bit, or maybe even some of the other ways that you're getting in front of these people.
Sure. How long is the show? 3-4 hours?
About 20 minutes.
Okay. I'll go fast then. So I think there's a couple of things that have served in my career well for reaching developers. One is that I'm a developer, right? So I still write code. I love writing code. I feel the pain that our customers feel. So I'm actually writing tools that I use every day. We use Runscope for ourselves all the time, every day, to help us build Runscope itself. And so prior to Twilio, I was, building a popular .NET REST client. I had done some talks on API stuff. I was already pretty ingrained in a set of communities. And so when I came in, I wasn't necessarily starting from scratch. And we kind of looked for people, who have existing footholds within communities that can go out and sort of, start from there and work out from their existing network. So, by the time I came to Runscope, that network had expanded dramatically from Twilio, from IFT, and from working with all these different API providers. And so, we started with a tool that we were going to use, but then we went to a community we already knew. And so that really has helped us, bootstrap that first set. Because when I joined Twilio, they already had, a significant number of registered developers. And I think we 15 exited or something like that while I was there. But going from zero to that and getting that first chunk is a significantly harder challenge. So for us, it was just, let's start with what we know. Let's start with the people we know. Let's start with the problems we know. And then we don't have to make up as much or try to figure out our way as much. If we build good tools and we know that we're using them every day, we know there are other developers out there like us that we can reach. So part of that is, like you mentioned, request bins. So one of the things we were inspired by was some open source projects that existed that we used a lot when we were supporting Twilio customers. So two really big ones were request bin, which is requestb.in, and then hurl.it, so HURL.it. We use this all the time to help our customers understand what their code was generating, or for hurl.it, give them a tool to poke the API. And so if you go into Runscope, you will see very clearly that we were inspired by those. But one of the things we wanted to do was, if you go to hurl.it and you use hurl.it, you automatically know how Runscope works. You are the most qualified and already sort of pre-educated lead that we could possibly get. You have self-identified as being somebody that's a great fit for our tooling. And so what we did is with Requestbin, we went to Jeff Lindsay, who's who worked at Twilio with us and a friend of ours, and said, hey, we really want to make this, we want to redesign it. We want to, maintain it. It was going down a little bit. We want to make sure it stays up and like really invest in it. And so what we did is we ended up acquiring it from him because it was such a good lead source from us. And it actually turned out to be even way better than we expected it would ever be. And so after that happened, we went to Twilio, who owned Hurlet. And the reason Twilio owned it is because while I was there, I bought it from Leah Culver. I actually expensed it. I didn't ask anybody for permission. I just bought this website and put it on an expense report. And it worked out, thankfully. But Twilio had sort of, let it neglected a little bit, not a bad way, just shifting priorities. And we said to Twilio, hey, we want to make this better. We want to keep it up and running. We want to, invest in it. It'll be better for your customers and it'll be better for our customers. And so, we took over Hurlet from Twilio as well. And so now we have these two really great lead generation sources where people have already self-identified as understanding APIs, having identified with, needing the visibility to see traffic in or out. And really the transition from that to a Runscope account is very small. And so I think those two investments have been probably one of the smarter decisions that we've made along the way for reaching developers. Somebody said to me that tools are the new ebooks. If that's the case, then we have a lot of ebooks.
That's the sound of another sale on Shopify, and the moment another business dream becomes a reality. Because if you're selling online and you're not using Shopify, I don't know why you're making your life harder. Shopify is the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide, whether you're selling, rare kicks to the latest product course that you developed. Shopify simplifies selling online and in person so you can focus on successfully growing your business. Shopify covers every sales channel from an in-person POS to an all-in-one e-commerce platform. It even lets you sell on marketplaces like TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram so you can get closer to the sale. It's incredible. Packed with industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth, Shopify gives you complete control over your business and your brand without having to learn any new skills. Plus, it's got 24/7 support, so someone's always there when you need it. We have been using Shopify on Dribbble since, honestly, before I got there, and that's over 6 years ago. So it's your turn to get serious about selling and try Shopify today. Sign up for a $1 per month trial at shopify.com/rocketship, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/rocketship to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/rocketship. This episode is brought to you by Miro. So when I was at Dribbble, over the 6 years, there was one tool that we would always use when we were doing cross-team collaboration. Whenever the collaboration started to get complex, we would bring in Miro. It made it incredibly easy to align stakeholders across regions and time zones and definitely teams with ease. And we were able to do all of that while being a completely remote team. It also has integrations into Jira, Azure, Rally, a lot of the tools that you're using already for product management and engineering. So you can import tasks from them as native cards, and it helps you see the big picture. It also helps stakeholders to understand what work needs to be done. It was incredibly valuable. And then they even have an estimation app that gives you a clear understanding of the work scope, lets you identify gaps, and then it has the ability for you to set clear expectations for delivery, especially when you're working across functions. So your first 3 Miro boards are free forever when you sign up today. Go to Miro.com/podcast. That's Miro.com/podcast.
So tell us a little more about that process of lead generation and how you convert them over to Runscope. Are you just hoping that they click the Runscope link when they're on the sites? Are you capturing any information about them? Tell us how that works.
Sure. So we don't require signups or registration on those sites. One of the reasons is when we started Runscope, we went to API providers and said, "Hey, we have this great tool for your customers. It's free. They should, you should link to us." And they're like, "Nah, we don't really like the sign up. It feels like, you have to have 2 services in order to use our one, and we're already linking to Requestbin, so that's free and there's no sign up. So why would we change?" So instead of getting them to link to us, we just bought Requestbin. And so now we have the link. But the sites are, we put them under this banner called community projects. And so they're free, no registration. If you go to our site and our developer guide, you can see the 3 or 4 of them that we have. There's just a Runscope header or a Runscope link in the header, and then the bottom half of the page just gives you a brief overview of the product. Now, for the most part, that does a really great job of converting people, again, because they're so highly qualified that seeing Runscope is a really easy, low friction transition from those tools. But we also wanted to sort of maximize, the audience that we get from those, and so we actually tag them with, a retargeting tag, and then we advertise Runscope to them throughout the rest of the internet. So those are some of our best performing ads that we do by far.
And are you able to see, I see you have the links tagged at the bottom of the page. Are you able to compare who signs up on the first visit there versus who signs up after being retargeted from there?
Yeah, we definitely have we track the difference, right? So if you just click straight through, it shows up in our customer dashboard as like partner request bin or partner hurl it. Whereas if you come through one of the ad campaigns, it gets tagged with that ad campaign. But the campaigns are scoped to specific audiences.
Yeah.
So we have a fairly good idea of who came from where and like what the conversion is. So one of the things that we do is, so we have a couple other community sites: API Digest, API Jobs, API Changelog, Embed Curl. I think that's all of them that we run. Some of those I was doing before Runscope and sort of rolled them in. Some of them were less successful, right? So like API Jobs and API Changelog were really great, interesting sites, but didn't convert customers for us a lot. So we actually found better homes for those. And those are in the midst of being transitioned over to new owners. So we're going to continue supporting and sponsoring them, but it just wasn't worth it for customer acquisition to keep maintaining those. Whereas I think the new owners will find a lot more value in the audiences that they pull in from those sites.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I wanted to take a minute to thank Codeship for sponsoring the show. Codeship makes continuous deployment simple and easy, and we've actually been happy customers of theirs for a very long time. You should go to codeship.io/rocketship to check out videos and tutorials all about how you can start using Codeship to deploy your product in a better way. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
So have you acquired all of these side projects, or have you built any of them from scratch?
So we built, we've acquired Hurlit and Request Bin. We built API Changelog and Embed Curl. I built those as weekend projects. When you're the CEO and you want to code, it's better if it's as a side project and not so much as a engineer infuriating terrible CEO code.
Yeah, well, I mean, I ask because I know that even the small side projects end up snowballing and balancing all these things on the side. I mean, if they're your primary source of lead generation and it's super qualified, that's amazing. But I think the struggle with a lot of people is these side projects don't perform as well and they end up taking a ton of time. How do you really optimize that?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's exactly what we saw with API Changelog, because to me, that was probably the most interesting one. If you rely on a third-party API, there are a lot of changes that happen that aren't even technical, a lot of policy changes that only show up in like the rewording of a sentence in an API document. And like a lot of the companies don't surface that in any way. They only tell you, hey, this parameter is now this. They don't say that, your license to a certain specific set of data is changed without, they just don't represent that in their change logs, right? And so API Changelog did a straight scrape of the docs and then did an HTML comparison, so you could see very clearly when the meaning of a sentence would change. And I thought that one was really interesting. I had really high hopes for that, and it just turned out that the type of audience that attracted just were not necessarily a Runscope customer. And so what we did is we found somebody else who that was a better fit for and said, hey, we already got the site. It's already up and running. It pretty much just needs a little bit of time to review the changes every week. I'll just transfer you the Heroku project and you can rebrand it as whatever you want. And so that was a really easy transition. So, we definitely watch to see from the community sites which ones are converting and which ones aren't. And we'll continue to prune them as needed. I think the one thing we have found is that the utilities outperform the content pretty significantly. So like API Jobs is a jobs board specifically for API integrators or API builders, and it's basically a content site, and it just doesn't do very well for giving us customers. Whereas Hurl and Requestbin solve a problem on the spot, and that problem is mirrored very well in our product. And so those convert significantly higher, and I mean, percentage wise, and absolute numbers wise.
Yeah. So something we've been doing lately with these talks has been trying to turn the microphone or the camera around on us and seeing if you can help out at all with Hookfeed or with Michael's product, Brandisty. Off the top of your head, I mean, we're on some level selling to developers, but also marketers. But is there anything that comes to mind for what we could do to reach developers better, whether that be tools or early things you could do to get developers to know about you and to support you?
Actually, I would love to jump in here because we're actually rolling out an API for Brandisty. And it's an image API where you give us an image and we return the image, we convert it and deliver it in any size. I would love any feedback into how we might be able to reach that developer community. Largely, we're marketing to designers right now, and we're going to have to make a huge switch. So I'd love any insight on that.
Interesting. So it says used by Bolt. Is that right?
Yeah.
They used to work in our office.
Oh, no way. Yeah.
Their
designer,
Artur.
He signed up. Yeah. He's, we've kind of gone back and forth for a while now, actually.
Yeah.
Good guy.
Sorry, you can edit this out if you want. Andrew, we worked with him for years at Twilio, and so he used to rent a room from us in the office. He was just here like a moment ago. So
Twilio's almost like its own incubator, it seems like.
We have a pretty significant alumni group now. A lot of founders and a lot of like really high level startup employees have really come out of Twilio.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
I think that actually says a lot about Twilio. I think Twilio did a really great job at selecting or like identifying, people who were leaders and like sort of like, that work at the top end of organizations. So I'm glad that we are surrounded by such a good alumni group. It makes us all look good as a whole.
Yeah. That's
so anyway, so about your API. So, I tend to take a very sometimes contrary position on API marketing, and I don't actually think you need to market to developers. So if you're saying that designers are already your sweet spot, that's probably like a good place to keep focusing and let them work out how to use the API or find the person to help them do the API integration, right? So it's really tricky to give a developer and say, hey, here's a tool if it doesn't solve some very specific problem they're having. So the developer has to actually identify with your problem if you're going to try to get them the API. It can't just be like giving them the tool that solves somebody else's in their organization's problem. What you have to do is you have to reach the people in the organization whose problem you actually underlying solve, and then let them work backwards to the developer. So that means you should still have a really great developer experience and great API docs and a reliable, easy to use API. But I'm not necessarily of the opinion that the developer is the way for every API to reach penetration into a company. It's usually you have to find the person whose problem you solve. So these designers can go to the developers in their companies and say, hey, we love this tool and we really want to extend it. They told us to use the API. Can you help us with that? And now those two people are aligned, right? They're both aligned on that problem, and the developer will come to you and not have a bad experience.
This episode is supported by the AWS Insiders podcast. AWS Insiders is a fast-paced, entertaining, and insightful look behind the scenes of AWS and cloud computing. Hosts Raul Submaranian and Hillary Doyle dig into the current state and the future of AWS by talking with people and companies that know it best. It's a show that's full of opinions, takeaways, and untold stories about the challenges, innovations, and mind-blowing promise of cloud computing. I checked out AWS Insiders, and look, it is a fantastic show, and it's perfect for anyone in tech who's looking for some of those behind-the-scenes stories, for some reassurance that, things are a little nuts everywhere, and everyone is struggling with a lot of the same problems. The first episode of Season 2 is all about filling the cloud talent gap, and it's an interesting discussion on what do we do to help to staff up internally What are some of the challenges that companies are facing? Search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. Thank you to AWS Insiders for their support.
Interesting. Yeah, and I love that answer because that saves me a ton of marketing effort. But it's so true. You still do have to stick with the pain. So that makes a ton of sense. When you talk about like a good API doc, who are some people that you guys have kind of even looked to for inspiration there?
I think, Twilio to me is like sort of the original like amazing API docs to the extent that people will use you just for their documentation. It was what drew me to Twilio was when I first found out about them. 5 minutes later, I had sent my message, and then I had the full API doc. I just read every word in their API doc. Right? It was like it was marketing to a developer, and I didn't even realize it at the time that the docs are essentially marketing material for developers. And so since then, I think Twilio's made a lot of improvements. That was part of the things that I worked on there, and I unfortunately didn't stay long enough to do a lot of what I wanted to do with it. But the team since has done a really great job at adding examples for all the SDKs and reorganizing and making it more clear. I think Stripe has amazing API docs. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody that doesn't like their API docs. GitHub does a really good job. They really keep theirs up to date really easily, or really consistently. And let's see, a couple others that I liked. There's probably a longer list of ones that I don't like, but I'm not going to name names on those.
Yeah, look to Stripe, Michael. They're just so good.
Awesome.
It's unbelievable. And to the point where you're looking through and they're giving you code samples of what to run to simulate these different endpoints. And they put your test mode key right in there. So you can literally just copy and paste into terminal or into Ruby.
Oh, no way.
And it's totally tailored to you. You're logged into the page.
So it's actually,
that's cool.
They do something really interesting I discovered when we wrote the scraper for API changelog of the Stripe docs. If you come to the site as an anonymous user and you go to their API docs and you copy and paste any of the examples, there's sort of a shadow account that's created for every anonymous user. So you can actually like start making requests and see that state reflected across sample requests, even if you haven't created an account yet. So like they've taken this idea of like, okay, we'll autofill it with your keys, but let's just assume that we'll give you an account even if you don't have one, so that all of these examples will work consistently all the way through.
Yeah. Yeah, they probably did that on their homepage too. They used to have that little curl box, kind of looks like your embed curl, where you just copy and paste. And before even signing up for Stripe, you'd already run a test mode charge.
Yep.
Yeah, that's actually something I hadn't thought of. That's really cool. I'm going to look into how we can do that.
The other thing I would say is if the API is not central to what you're doing and the docs, if you're not going to offer API as a service, for instance, a tool like Apiary, API.ary.io can help you like make really good API docs that are interactive and like you can drop keys into and that you can update easily and maintain. And so if it's not core to your service, or even if it is, Apiary might be a good solution for sort of getting that first pass at API docs out there and something that's a little bit more maintainable without having to start from scratch.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm actually mocking them up in HTML right now. So the maintainability might be low as we grow this thing.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned, John, that you read the Twilio docs and that they are marketing for developers, because when I think back, when I'm thinking about using a service, whether it's let's say Urban Airship for push notifications or Stripe, before you sign up, you're reading through the docs and you can get a feel pretty quickly whether you think it's a reliable service or how easy it'll be to integrate. And a lot of times that decides whether or not I'll sign up for something.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can tell if somebody's put effort into their API docs, they've probably put effort into the API. Uh-huh. But if they haven't put it, if you're like downloading a PDF, like what does that tell you about like the level of rigor that they're putting into all of their work, right? Is the API itself going to be this sort of unintuitive and cumbersome to work with, or is it just the documentation? So like you want to, I'm like a 13-year-old girl. So like you want to make sure your API docs are all like good and stuff.
You're saying put stickers on them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the only API docs I've ever downloaded the PDF of were Amazon for, what service? It was like a fulfillment service, and it was the worst API I've ever used. So it's probably a good indicator.
If somebody's not making their API docs public, they're probably ashamed of them, and that should just tell you everything you need to know about the API.
Yeah. Well, awesome. This has been great. Could you let everyone know where they can keep up with you online?
Sure. So I'm pretty much everywhere. The most important place is runscope.com. Get your free account. If you like hearing me blather on about APIs, we actually have a API and cloud podcast called trafficandweather.io. Get it? Traffic and weather, API and cloud. And so that's with Steve Marks, who works at Dropbox. We have a very irreverent take on APIs. We like to record for some reason. So we do that every once in a while. That's a lot of fun. And then I'm on Twitter at John Sheehan. So JohnSheehan.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Rocketship podcast. If you haven't yet, pop open iTunes and subscribe to be notified of future episodes. We have some really great ones lined up.
And while you're there, leave us a review. We really appreciate each and every one of them.
I hope everything's alright with you. Maybe I should go and see about you. Collect some love if you don't mind. Collect some love if you don't mind, no. My heart it I smile a second and it's gone.
Hey guys, welcome to The Collective. I'm Brianne Helfrich, a 26-year-old bioethics PhD student and clothing brand CEO. Welcome to my podcast where we talk all things health and wellness, navigating your 20s, and becoming the best version of yourself. So, sit down, play that episode, and join the collective.
Hey, this is Mary Beth Lassiter. Are you craving a new podcast? I've got a recommendation. Check out Gravy, the James Beard award-winning podcast that shares stories of the changing American South, brought to you through the foods we eat. It's produced by the Southern Foodways Alliance and distributed by APT Podcast Studios. Listen to Gravy on your porch during happy hour to hear about the mystery of the missing Pappy Van Winkle bourbon. Don't miss out. Follow Gravy wherever you get your podcasts.